So so hi everyone, my name is Charlotte and I'm the Training and Opportunities Officer of the SPA. And this is our panel I'm really excited about on reporting on disability. And we're joined by some really lovely guests, including Claudia, Hannah, and Rachael. And if you guys want to kick off and talk about yourselves a little bit, and we can start with you, Claudia.
My name is Claudia. I'm based in London. I'm 27 years old. I studied journalism at university, but became a fashion stylist for, I'd say, 2 or 3 years before I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And then after that, I had acquired several more diagnoses through, I guess, medical neglect on the part of NHS. In terms of trying to treat what was going wrong with me, it kind of woke me up to the fact that there are certain conditions that receive medical kind of acknowledgement, funding, research and care, and then there's diagnoses that don't. So I kind of fell into the second category, and for a while it was quite confusing and distressing, and partly because I was working in fashion and I could barely kind of dress myself when my first chronic illness kind of manifested. So I felt like I was losing my identity a little bit, and also realizing how much ableism there is in the creative industries, because working as a stylist, you know, things like diversity are quite kind of central to a lot of the kind of editorials or videos that we would do, or the magazines that I would work for. But once I became disabled, I realized that I'd never really seen any other disabled people in fashion magazines, working in the industry, and that in general, kind of from a cultural standpoint, illness isn't really something that was being acknowledged. And so I started talking about it more on social media, and I wrote a few articles for Galdem as a way to kind of like come out to my community as someone who was newly disabled. And so the feedback and response I got was just kind of overwhelmingly positive, and a lot of people from the fashion industry were getting in contact with me, either to talk about how refreshing it was to kind of see people talking about disability, or the fact that they also had health issues and conditions that maybe they weren't being fully open about because of the stigma that's kind of attached to it. So yeah, I just realized that I'd come from a journalism background and I'd never really followed up with it, mainly because I didn't feel like I had a voice or where that voice fit in. And also the fact that I didn't want to go into working as a journalist for other publications and being asked to write about things that I didn't feel passionate about. So I picked up a lot of different skills working as a fashion stylist. You know, you work with budgets, you work with different types of productions. Obviously, as a freelancer, I was self-employed, so I already had that. And then I would do a lot of creative direction on the side for editorials that I wanted to see published. So collectively, that kind of gave me the skill set that I needed to start my own publication, which is Able Zine.
It's beautiful.
The copy. Thank you. So, yeah, it took quite a long time to put issue one together. I called it a zine because I didn't really know how big it was going to be. I didn't anticipate it being as big as it turned out, essentially. But I think, I don't know, I have a high standard for myself and the work that I put out, but also it took a long time to craft because I was very conscious of the disability community and didn't want to kind of perpetuate any negative stereotypes or cause harm in any way. So the content just was crafted over like almost 2 years, along with the layout and everything. And I guess learning how to work with chronic fatigue, which was also, you know, a big learning curve. So yeah, now we're working on issue 2 and things are going really well. So I'll leave it to the other guys to introduce themselves and if anyone has any questions.
a fantastic magazine. Like, definitely see like the fashion influences on the cover as well. Like, it's just like, yeah, sorry, I'm just a massive like fangirl over it. I'll leave. I'll leave Rachel to talk now.
Hey, I'm Rachel. As I've already said in the introduction, my pronouns are she, they, and I'm 32. I'm up here in the northeast of England, and I was diagnosed with lupus when I was 16. I had a couple of other things before that, like arthritis and dyspraxia. I was diagnosed with that when I was only 10. And through getting lupus as I was a teenager, and I learned that I couldn't do a lot of things. You know, when you're a teenager, all you want to do is go out with your friends and stuff. So it was a big change. So I became really depressed, and I had a bit of a mental health breakdown, and that's when my life really changed. From having the mental health breakdown, I don't want to go into it, but I did things that I really regret. I tried to take my life at one point, and it meant that I had to rebuild my life completely. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. Like, before that, I was working in childcare, which wasn't practical for having an illness that meant you were going to catch bugs every week and you had chronic fatigue. So I decided that I was going to start writing. I decided now was the time to take the leap and start writing. I didn't know what I wanted to write about. Like Claudia, I've always had a really big interest in fashion and design. So I started a little fashion blog. And from that started out as an escape to try and give me something to take my mind off my illness. But naturally, like, parts of my own life and my own personality started to seep through. So I started writing about, well, I think it was because I started going to Fashion Week and I started going to London that I realised how inaccessible all of those things were, and how much of a toll it took on my life, like, to go into the, like, how exhausted I was. And I couldn't do, like, I studied fashion communication at university, and I had to drop out because it just wasn't a sustainable thing that I could do at university, because I was just so exhausted all the time, and there just wasn't much leeway, and there wasn't like any special accommodations given to us and stuff. I was treated like I was lazy at university. So I started writing about my own experiences in that sort of field. I started writing about what it was like to be a disabled student. I started writing about what it was like to be a disabled person on benefits, and what it was like to be working class and disabled and unemployed. And then I started writing a bit more about feminism and disability and things. And that's when I was really lucky to get picked up by the Metro. One of the editors in the Metro saw some of my work, and she asked me to start writing for them on a more regular basis. She asked me to pitch to them. So I started pitching to them, and that was the kick that I needed, I think, because I wouldn't have had the confidence to pitch to anywhere else before then. So I started pitching to the Metro, and then I pitched to Hello Giggles as well. And Hello Giggles was the one that actually took it, because the Metro, it didn't really come of anything. The first thing that I pitched to the Metro, because, to be honest, it wasn't very good. But I wrote a couple of bits and bobs here and then I went back to the Metro when I felt a bit more confident a couple of years later, and that's when I started properly launching my career. This was in 2017, and from then I really started realising that nobody else is going to speak for us in the disability community, so I had to start doing it myself. And I stopped using my writing as an escape from my disability, and I started actually using it as something to get more word out, and to get our message out. And that really came to a head during the pandemic, because one thing I noticed during the pandemic was, and I'm sure all of you noticed that as well, all of you disabled writers especially noticed just how little people cared. I mean, it's an awful thing to say, but disabled people were thrown under the bus, and it needed to be written about. And it was one thing that I've realised, it really needed to be written about. And that I was lucky in a lot of ways that I did get to write some really good articles about it. But I was also getting really worn down and being told that my story wasn't trauma driven enough, or it wasn't inspirational enough. So from that, I decided one day to well, I didn't just decide, I was talking about it a lot with friends, and I decided to start my own publication, The Unwritten, for a space for disabled people to tell their own stories. And that's honestly the best thing I've ever done. I absolutely love it. I love that we've got this big space for disabled people to come and give their own opinions and tell their stories without them having to be edited to fit what the newspaper or what's in the news, or to fit a certain inspirational or trauma sort of narrative. It's just them telling their stories, simple as. And they also get to give their opinions on a lot of current things, or things that make them mad, things that make us mad. And it also gives me a great place to mouth off about things when I don't get commissioned as well. That's what I love doing more than anything. And I wouldn't be able to do it without Hannah, who's sat there, and Caroline, who I believe is watching right now. And Caroline's just pointed out to me, we didn't launch in a matter of years, we launched in a matter of days. We started talking about it in early September, and it was launched, and we've only been going for 4 months, and we're really lucky to have the reception we do. And we are trying our best to pay our writers, and we're getting there. We're still paying our writers, but we're, bit by bit, we'll start publishing a lot more, hopefully, when we have more money. And I'm going to stop rambling now. Hannah, talk.
Before you do, just want to quickly flag, if any of you guys have any questions, because these panelists have said some really insightful and wonderful things so far. If you have any questions about anything, please just chuck them in the chat, or raise your hand on the Zoom, and then I'll unmute you. Or if you'd rather keep your identity private, just send me a private message on Zoom and I'll ask a question for you. Okay, so Hannah, talk.
Thank you, I shall. So I'm Hannah. I'm a freelance journalist, editor, press officer. I'm also a baby sex educator. I'm just starting out doing that. A little bit of a multi-hyphenate because I get bored too easily to do one thing. Sorry, I thought I froze for a second there. So I started out in the industry as a press agency journalist, doing a lot of real life stories, and kind of struggling with the intersection of that with my own kind of coming to terms with my own disabilities, which I'd had since I was all started out when I was about 14 with a condition called fibromyalgia and a rare autoimmune condition called scleroderma, which is a delight. And I kind of had to keep changing track in my career because my conditions meant that every dream I had was oh, that's not going to work. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I wanted to go into war zones and all these things. And I was having chronic fatigue and chronic pain is probably not a good shout in a war zone. So I had to change track, which I think my family was very happy about. And I know they are. So I moved into kind of press agency journalism, and I started to have a really complicated and difficult relationship with the industry and my own disabilities, because I realized that I was contributing to quite a lot of inspiration porn through my career. And as a disabled person, I was finding it really difficult to communicate that in a newsroom and trying to deconstruct those stereotypes even from the inside. I was finding it increasingly difficult. And in the end, I ultimately went freelance after my health kind of gave me a nice hard push out the door. And since then, I've been writing all about all the things that I'm passionate about, which is kind of mainly the way that disability intersects with sexuality, with queer issues, with social issues, with mental health. I'm also a sex columnist with the lovely Rachael at The Unwritten. And I'm also particularly interested in how we deconstruct the current representations of disability in the news, in the media, not only through amazing publications made by Claudia and Rachael, but also I'd like to create broader change within the industry. So I ran my web exploring how to report disability for donor resources. I want to say last month, but it could have been the month before. Time is hazy right now. And I'm now working on a comprehensive guide that I am aiming to deliver for free to journalists, editors, newsrooms, as many as I can, that we will explore the different ways to approach and report disability sensitively, both from the perspective of a disabled person and for non-disabled reporters as well. And I'm particularly interested in how we combat and raise awareness of layered oppression for people who are disabled, but also have other marginalised identities, and how that intersects, particularly obviously race, religion, like being LGBTQ, etc. And it's a project that I hope I'm going to, before being released, is going to get peer reviewed by lots of disabled journalists that I'm going to ask for their very kind help. Originally it was meant to be released in April, but it's going to be coming out this summer because I'm sick. And everything happens two months later than you think it will when you're chronically ill and a journalist. And I'm going to stop rambling now, but that's me.
Oh, please don't ramble. Please don't say apologize. Like, there's no rambling. Everything you're saying is really interesting and insightful. And yeah, like I went to like the journal resource session you did. Like, you made some really brilliant points about sort of, as you said, like inspiration porn. Like, you know, I'm neurodivergent. I have disability. Like, I'm disabled. So like, I have definitely been someone who's tapped into inspiration porn myself unknowingly, and I sort of thought that maybe it was a way of sort of getting respect, but then I realized that's not really the same thing. But yeah, enough about myself.
Yeah, I think with inspiration porn, where I think a lot of people, when they first start to understand their own disability, really actually find an affinity with inspiration porn, because it's like, oh, I can be normal. And like, it's a way to kind of like make themselves like non-disabled people and be like, oh, I can be that inspirational person. And I think it takes a lot of time and introspection to get to a point where you can recognize that inspiration porn is actually more damaging than good.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to overspeak you. My Zoom's a little bit slow. I was just wondering if Claudia and Rachel had any thoughts on inspiration porn before I moved on to some questions.
Oh God, yes, lots of thoughts on inspiration porn. I think it's a thing that a lot of non-disabled people don't realise they're doing a lot of the time as well, because it's so drilled into us to see disabled people as inspirational. So, and especially the way that certain branches of the media have portrayed disabled people as either inspirational or dying, you know, they don't really see the middle part. So that's where the work has got to come in to show the middle part, you know. Like, I think it's really important that there needs to be shown the middle part, because like a lot of non-disabled people who don't know disabled people, they don't see things that aren't inspirational or trauma, but it needs to stop. And it's our job as people in the media to stop the inspiration porn, because it's getting too much, especially when the only things, especially during a global pandemic, when still the only things you're seeing on like breakfast every morning when I turn on breakfast TV, there's a disabled kiddie walking a marathon. It's like, oh, I'm sick of it now.
I think from my perspective, at least when I started an Instagram account for AbleZine, which was, you know, naturally the first thing I did before releasing it physically, to try and give, I guess, a bit of an identity to what I was looking to create before I had everything ready to show people. I noticed that on Instagram in particular, a lot of the accounts I was discovering whilst looking for disabled people were actually like accounts for disabled children made by their parents. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that overall, but I think this is where inspiration porn often starts with children with disabilities, and there's the sense that their narrative is being told for them by somebody who isn't disabled, which is obviously quite problematic. And then when you look on TV, I mean, I tend to have a problem with BBC because of the inspiration porn I think they portray. through shows like The One Show, or just generally like the charity-based children in need, Red Nose Day, all of these types of things. They're always putting all of these videos together about like how inspirational these disabled kids are for fundraising money for basic services that they need, because the government aren't, investing them, or there are cuts being made to their services and stuff. And it makes people, it detracts from the real issues at hand, obviously, and it plays into inspiration porn. And then as you get older, there's the other place where I think inspiration porn is very prevalent, and that's in film or TV. And so within film, it's like there are tropes about disabled people, and that's either inspiration porn, or it's that they're a villain because of their visible disabilities being portrayed in that way, or they're a victim and they are, unhappy with life, and they hate their disability and they don't want to be disabled and they don't want to be here anymore, kind of thing. So it's like those three main tropes that are played into heavily by Hollywood. And obviously, I'm sure the work that collectively we're doing, Rachel and Hannah, that we hope to provide a more nuanced and less stereotypical portrayal of disability by letting disabled people speak for themselves, and for showing them in a different light that isn't inspirational or depressing. It's just like, this is life. And it's just the same as non-disabled people, except we may have a disability of some kind. It may be very inherent to our, identity, such as with neurodiversity. But in general, it's like sometimes non-disabled people think that we don't have anything in our lives except our disability. And obviously that is really problematic as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, carry on, mate. Go ahead.
The media, following on from what Claudia said, like the media doesn't help with this. The society already has a preconceived notion of what disability is, and it's either tragic or inspirational. And then when you have the media kind of compounding that again and again and again with the same stories, and using really insensitive language, like so many huge national newspapers still use language like wheelchair bound and things like that. Language that has this negative connotation constantly, it just keeps feeding this negative view of disability, and it means we lack all nuance when it comes to disability, except for platforms like the Unwritten and Able Zine. So still a long way to go, but we're making progress.
And then, of course, if we haven't got the tragic and the inspiration, we're being called scroungers, and we're not deserving of help at all. And that's even worse, and that was definitely perpetuated by the media in a massive way, which is something Hannah spoke about in her journal research course, which was really useful. But yeah, that's one of the worst parts as well. It's like that was a massive thing perpetuated by the media in a big way.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I left enough the gaps so I didn't overspeak anybody. But yeah, I'm just joking. But yeah, thank you so much. It's some really interesting insight, and I found it really interesting what Claudia said about like movies and stuff, because I think recently, like in there was like The Witches, when Anne Hathaway, her character was like an amputee essentially, and that again was really problematic because it suggested quite, just gave like a really uncomfortable sort of trope about it. And then like with Metro, it's something really interesting. And then obviously we have Sia's horrible movie. I could probably like do like 3 hours. I'm not even gonna go into that because I have like right, that movie. Yeah.
No, we're not talking about that today.
Honestly, like I would have to do a whole new conference just like why I don't like that movie. But yeah. On to the questions now. We've got someone's asked, what would you say is the difference between trauma porn and writing about your trauma in a productive and cathartic way? And if we could start with Claudia and then move to Rachel and then Hannah.
I think Rachel would be a great person to answer this, but I'll just say that I think it's all about autonomy, and it's about an individual. I don't like to hear that Rachel's had feedback that trauma isn't central enough to whatever article it was that she was pitching, because I think non-disabled people feel they have an ownership over people's private information as it pertains to disability. So if you just say, I'm a disabled person, it's not enough. Like, people want to know how you're disabled, when you were disabled, you know, was there an accident, and really get into the nitty-gritty. And I think, you know, when I was making Able the first time round, I had a little bit of a backlash or criticism from this like disability Facebook group that I was in, that to discuss people's conditions was in some way me basically adopting the medical model of disability as opposed to the social model, and that like I was fetishizing these people's illnesses. But it was a really difficult place to come from, because I was like, I'm trying to contribute towards representation by allowing people that want to talk about their conditions or their disabilities to do so. And I understand not every disabled person wants to outline what they've been diagnosed with and things like that, because it is private information. But if somebody does, then should I silence them by not, you know, discussing their disability in a way of saying, you know, this was the first like glossy print publication that I knew in existence that was more or less wholly focused on disability, mental health, chronic illness, etc. And to kind of like, I don't know, hide the reality of that in some ways was confusing to me. But I understood it in this, you know, people come from different places and people have very different experiences of disability. And I think that's another thing that the media doesn't really acknowledge, that we're not a monolith and that disability isn't the same for everyone. It doesn't manifest in the same way for everyone. People don't experience the same types of discrimination. This is why you need a lot of nuance. You need like people to discuss things in a multifaceted way, to really kind of create an awareness around the fact that disability isn't just one thing and it doesn't just look one way. So I'm probably going off on a tangent here, but can't even remember how this relates to the question. But yes, I think if somebody wants to talk about their trauma, then that's the only way, that's the only time it's appropriate. They shouldn't necessarily be asked to divulge traumatic information for the sake of making it more appealing to non-disabled people, because you know, I think you'd be surprised how many people are actually interested and willing to learn if you just place that content in front of them. You don't need to ram it down their throat with the trauma porn like people are saying.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And like, you're not rambling at all. Like, everything you're saying is really, really interesting and insightful. And like, I'm learning a lot and we're all learning a lot. So please keep talking. So Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the difference between trauma porn and writing about it is literally your decision. It's your decision that you want to write about it, you know, so it's you telling your story in the way that you want to tell it, and not feeling that you have to tell it in a certain way, or being told that you have to tell it in a certain way, or feeling like you have to tell it that way, otherwise you're not going to get it published. And it's sad, but there are quite a few opinion or personal pages that do, and it's because of their readership. It's because of the way people have been sold disability, that when you are asked to write about disability, you're expected to tell, as Claudia said, when were you disabled? How were you disabled? How did this make you feel? And there's always the big emphasis on how did this make you feel? Did you feel like and it's things like, did you feel like an outsider? Did this hurt you? That sort of stuff. Like, it's like, how did this make you feel in your soul? And you can be talking like about having a bad ankle and stuff, and it's like, how did this make you feel? And it's like, well, I had a bad ankle. What's that got to do with how I'm feeling mentally? But it's the difference, you know. It's there's nuance in these sort of things, and it's agency as well, as Claudia said. It's whether you choose to write these things or not, and it's about being able to represent yourself in an authentic way. And that's what I've always wanted to do with the Unwritten. I've always wanted to give people the choice to represent themselves in a way that is true to them. So I'd never ask anybody to push and give and say anything that they weren't comfortable with writing, because that's just not fair, you know. Like, if you want, like, if you do want to write about your big trauma, you can write about your big trauma, but I'm not going to go, oh well, that's just not traumatic sounding enough, tell us how you really feel, because I'm not your therapist. You don't have to write that. If you don't want to write that, it's up to you. I mean, if you want to write that, you can write that, but that's your choice.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. Like, definitely, I do feel like some publications do try and push the trauma angle a bit too much, when it's like, it doesn't serve you, it more serves their clickbait, and that's not really on, really, because it's all about taking control and empowering yourself to tell your own stories, rather than them trying to twist it into something they can get clicks on, which, yeah, that's just not right. And I'm glad that there's people like you who are standing up to that and making sure that it's not continuing.
Oh, thank you.
No worries. And lovely Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on for that, I think I agree with everything Claudia and Rachel just said. I think the key part of it is, if you're telling your story yourself, that you can't enact trauma porn, because you are choosing what you are deciding to share. But I think the most key parts in terms of avoiding creating trauma porn is in the production and the editing process. Because if you've got, I mean, someone's like, when I used to produce stories that I would now say are absolutely inspiration and trauma porn, I would have editors saying to me, it's like, no, we need to drill right into like the deepest, like darkest parts of this. We need to know all the most in like personal detail you could possibly have. And your job was as a journalist and a producer was to try and draw out the worst moments of someone's life for dramatic effect. And that's when you step over into trauma porn, because you're not empowering that person to tell their story on their own terms. You're manipulating them to tell the story on your terms for that publication's purpose. And I think that happens a lot. I mean, I'm sure all three of us have had this with edits and stuff, with articles where I've been asked to share more additional like traumatic detail, or ask like for more detail about how I felt. And I think that's where we really need to be treating the problem of trauma porn, is in like, you know, disabled journalists can tell their stories, and that's brilliant. But until we get the non-disabled editors and producers and people who are involved in creating those stories from start to finish and telling them how to stop making trauma porn, we're not going to see like the significant change that we need to in terms of eradicating trauma porn. Because I would love to turn on my TV and watch a documentary about disability that wasn't an hour and a half of trauma porn. That would be my ideal. So yeah, I think it's from both sides. We need to have more disabled producers, editors, journalists telling their stories, and then we also need to educate a lot of non-disabled people.
Yeah, definitely. I do think like there's definitely a lot of educating to be done, and like even in 2021, like I feel like recent events with like COVID and the way disabled people have been treated shows that we've still, even very top of government, there's still so much more we need to do. And following on from that, we've got a question, I believe, from the Unwritten's sort of a deputy, Caroline, and she was wondering, for all of you guys, how you think the media portrays the Paralympics. Do you think they're sort of portrayed good or bad? And do you think the portrayal of Paralympics by the media breaks or reinforces disability stereotypes?
I mean, I'm not into really sports myself, or the Olympics in general. But what I will say is, from an editorial standpoint, I've seen disabled artists kind of respond to the Paralympics in a way that implies it is strongly inspiration porn that is presented through the advertisements and such like for the Paralympics. I think that one issue that I have with the kind of narratives around overcoming hurdles as disabled people is this idea that it is in our nature to overcome all of these barriers, all of these struggles that society places on us or living in an ableist society. And I often feel like it's portrayed that way to minimize any kind of issues or arguments that we want to put forward, and also takes the weight off of, you know, non-disabled people, society, the government, to actually support us with more accommodations, more accessible schools, you know, houses, businesses. So I think that's what the Paralympics plays into, this idea that, oh, this terrible thing can happen to you, but you can overcome it by, you know, just pure will and, like, you know, strength of mind, and you can be a superhero. Because I think that's really another layer to the Paralympics, this idea of being superhuman. So, you know, either it is the trauma about, you know, how you became disabled, or it's like, look at how amazingly they flipped the story and now, you know, they love their disability and it's getting them, you know, on TV or whatever it is. Little bit, shouldn't probably said that last bit, but, you know, I don't necessarily think that it serves a greater purpose for non-disabled people, for disabled people, except that it does give some an opportunity who are passionate about sports, who do want to, you know, compete at an athletic level. There are definitely disabled people that are passionate about that, and who, you know, for somebody like Rachael, she uses writing in a way to, or at least she said she did, like in the early days, to kind of process and have something to kind of put that energy into. And for some people that's sports. So you know, I'm all for there being spaces for disabled people and communities to come together, meet one another and be celebrated. But I do think that there should be more than just the Paralympics, at least, you know, on TV, like, because disabled communities aren't really highlighted at all, unless it's either disabled kids doing sporting stuff or older disabled people doing sporting stuff. So yeah, I think there are a lot of issues there, actually.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Something was going off, and I didn't want it to ruining anyone's thread. So yeah, like, what do you think, Rachael?
I think it's all well and good showing the Paralympics and everybody getting excited about disabled people for 2 weeks every 4 years, but then you've also got to do something else, you know, like Hannah just spat a drink out there. They get excited about disabled people for 2 weeks or 4 years and then forget about them again, you know. So it's like Claudia said, we've got to show more disabled sport. We've got to do, like, you'll have certain political people and certain high profile celebrities touting about how much they love the Paralympics, and then they'll do nothing to help disabled people. And you just need to go that further step, you know. You cannot just be celebrating the Paralympics and then doing nothing else. It needs to go further than that. And it's great, it is great that we show the Paralympics, but it does just come down to the inspiration a lot of the time, and we don't really learn a lot else apart from the inspiration. We don't really learn a lot about how they got into the sports and how disabled people themselves can get into the sports, you know. We literally just learn about they got disabled if it was an acquired disability, or they pushed into this sport to get themselves to overcome the disability, like Claudia said. But we don't really learn a lot about the pipeline of how difficult it is and how inaccessible sports and things are for disabled people. So it is, you know, it's just shining up like disabled people, and we need more than that. And I'm going to get too passionate and get told off, probably.
I'm going to tell you off.
So I'm going to stop talking now.
Don't worry, no telling off from me.
Okay. Okay, I'm done talking anyway.
Over to you, Hannah.
I think I think I agree with pretty much everything Claudia and Rachel just said. I think the issue with the Paralympics is not the Paralympics themselves. The Paralympics themselves are brilliant because disabled athletes deserve to get the coverage and deserve to have the opportunities to race against the best in their field. The issue with the Paralympics is the way that it's reported and the way that, like, every 4 years they trot out all of their disabled journalists to report on the Paralympics, and then for the next 4 years they vanish and you don't see them talk about anything, because the only time they want to talk to disabled people is when we're inspirational and we can give them a nice heartwarming moment. That's really the only time. So I'm just picking up on Rachel's passion. I think with the Paralympics we kind of drive home this narrative that look at these amazing disabled people who are rightfully amazing, but it's used as this platform to say, well, why aren't all disabled people like them? And it's used as an opportunity for non-disabled people to compare and say that if you're not like that, if you're not an inspirational disabled person, then you're a lazy scrounger. And it just perpetuates that like split narrative of either you're lazy or you're inspirational, and or you're traumatic. There's no in between or nuance for what the disabled experience actually is like. And I think, again, like Rachel said, a lot of non-disabled people use it as an opportunity to champion disabled rights and then just stay silent for the rest of the year. Like all those people who love the Paralympics, they've all been silent the entire way through the pandemic, while hundreds of thousands of people, mostly disabled people, have died. So it's a frustrating like representation when the Paralympics comes around, because as a disabled person, you want to be really like empowered and like enjoy the like platforming of an event like that. But what's getting in our way is this inspirational reportage of it that kind of pollutes that image and means that we're kind of stuck with this idea of like, oh, okay, are our lives are only deemed valuable if I can run or I can win a race, and it's exhausting. So yeah, event itself, not a problem. The way that it's covered, big problem.
I'm muted. Yeah, probably it's for the best, I think. I feel like maybe committee members would argue, but yeah, that's a really, really good point, because what I find really sort of unusual and quite sort of concerning is that I don't know of many sort of like high profile disabled journalists. Like obviously I know you and Rachel quite now. I know like now I'm aware of like a few more, and like Claudia I've always like known, but like there is seem to be like not many like sort of sort of like your Laura Koonsberg or Hugh Edwards, like really quickly come to mind. But when it comes to disabled journalists, like there aren't that many like really on like the forefront of reporting, which is definitely a massive issue. And like as you said, like
what and then I think also the one I just wanted to add on to that very good point of like, and then unfortunately the ones that the high profile disabled journalists who do tend to be in the spotlight tend to be from higher class working backgrounds. They tend to be white, they tend to be straight, they tend to be cisgendered. So it means that we have this very limited view of what disability is, and we don't talk about the nuance of how like race, religion, class, like queer identities intersect with the disabled experience.
Yeah, definitely. Good.
Or high profile journalists that you see on TV, there is a play on the visibility factor of their disabilities, and I'm all in support for that, because we want to see visibly disabled people represented on TV, within the news, etc. But there isn't any nuance for, you know, deaf people, blind people, people with invisible disabilities. And the only times I've ever read, for example, about a high profile person with one of my conditions is that meant that they, you know, went into early retirement and left the industry, full stop. So, you know, I don't think we even have like awareness around something like chronic pain, which can affect all types of disabled people, but there's no representation for that. So yeah, I think aside from them being white and privileged, it's also, you know, what about other disabled people? Because it doesn't feel like they really get many opportunities for visibility themselves.
I agree. It's like we have this very stagnant view of what disability is, and it's usually a person who's very visibly disabled. So people who don't have that who are openly disabled but aren't instantly like identifiable as disabled, just don't get the same voice, like their voices aren't heard to the same extent.
Yeah, it's like Toni Braxton, she's got lupus, but the only time you'll ever hear about Toni Braxton having lupus is when she's in hospital with lupus. You never hear about any other time about it, because it's not something she really speaks about, because it's not relevant for her to speak about it, apart from when she's doing charity stuff. But as soon as, and it's the same with Selena Gomez when she's in hospital with lupus. Is it Selena Gomez? Yeah, Selena Gomez. It's when she's in hospital with lupus. You know, you'll never just hear about just casual things to do with it, and you'll never just hear about it in passing. It's always, they're always.
Justin Bieber and like Avril Lavigne and some people like that, they've been diagnosed with Lyme disease in the past. I think even Celine Dion or someone like that. But it's only ever reported about like once they've beaten it, kind of thing.
Like
to hear about Justin Bieber's process of like, you know, when he's dealing with the Lyme disease, not the fact that he's got millions of pounds to cure it, you know, when many other people don't have that opportunity. So it puts, you know, a further divide between you know, high profile people in the media that could, you know, serve as, and this is sometimes how I feel about inspiration porn, is that I do think there should be a divide between disabled people who see other disabled people as inspirational, because I don't want to censor that, because I do think in some ways it can be important that we have role models within our own community who we can, you know, look up to. Like, you know, some young girls may look up to Selena Gomez, but if it's never Selena talking openly about the kind of day-to-day battles or whatever, and it's only ever, oh, like she's better now, or however they want to portray it, it doesn't really, it just creates like this binary between like illnesses that normal people have, you know, or people who don't have the kind of resources to spend money just like helping themselves get better, and those that just don't have those resources and the access that those kind of celebrities do.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Just want to say thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, we are kind of out of time for today, but I could sit here for hours and talk about this stuff, and I really appreciate you all giving up your time to be here. And like sort of like, where can we find Ablezine? Where can we find The Unwritten? Where can we find your work? It'd be great for maybe if you could let the people know how they can find you.
Well, for Ablezine, we're mainly on Instagram. We do have like Facebook and Twitter, but we don't really use it. So catch us on Instagram at ABLEZINE, or you can send me an email directly to claudia@ablezine.com.
We're at theunwritten.co.uk. On Twitter, we're The Unwritten Pub, at The Unwritten Pub, you know. On Twitter, I'm Rachael C. Dailey, and I've also got links to like my work and stuff on Twitter as well. It's easier to find it through that way. Yeah.
And then you can find me just with my full name, Hannah Shewan Stevens, which is awkward to spell, I know, SHEWAN, it's my own name. I'm on Twitter at Hannah Shewan, Instagram at Hannah Shewan Stevens, and I would give you my website, but it's currently under construction, as it has been for the last year, because I'm lazy. Just Google me.
Okay, well, thanks again, guys, for coming. And just like to say for the audience, like, you've got a bit of a choice of where you can go next. We've got our reporting on race, culture and social issues panel in room 1. If you're not sick of my voice, you can hear about making a successful newsletter with some great panelists in room 2, or you can do an interactive CV workshop with Jobs Board. And also at 7 p.m, if you're up for any awards, be sure to tune in for the SPA Awards at 7 o'clock, and it's going to be fun. And again, thank you guys for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.